welcome to Senate Judiciary. I'm at a disadvantage here. My watch has broken and stopped working, and so it's 10:40 a.m. We're a little late getting started. The subject today is Justice Reinvestment 2 and the House version of S338, and how the Senate would respond to the changes made by the House. Briefly, I think we found six major changes. The most difficult one for me, and I think for the Department of Corrections, is regarding the furlough revocation appeal when there's intercept of 30 days or longer. And so we have Commissioner Baker here, Interim Commissioner Baker, who's staying longer than the interim first prescribed, but we thank you for hanging in there with us, Jim. If you want to comment on the department and the administration's concerns about the changes that the House made.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion in the House about this, and I think for me and for the administration and representing our ability to be able to manage the furlough population. I mean, I know you all know this, but I have to start out by saying there was a lot of conversation in the House about liberty issues and due process around when we interrupt someone on furlough. And, one of the things that makes this conversation so challenging, and, we don't disagree with CSG's report on the number of people that enter the system through interrupts of furlough, is the fact that we're one of the few states in the country that run a furlough system. And I think sometimes folks forget when we furlough someone, they're still serving a jail sentence. And the only reason why they're out is because we furloughed them under the furlough system. And my concern with the way the language developed around the de novo hearings as part of the court's overview of us abusing our discretion, because that is the standard as I understand it legally, that, when the courts can look, I always confuse Rule 74 and 75. But when the court takes a look at, it's a review of the record if we abused our discretion or not. And I have no issue with that whatsoever. Where I get concerned is when we're going to open up the review of our interrupts to new evidence and testimony on a system that is meant for us to manage folks from facilities to the community. We manage the risk. And I can envision getting into situations where we interrupt somebody, then there's a motion to stay the interrupt in order to have the hearing in the court, and it's taken our ability away to manage that risk. Because by the time we make the decision that we're going to interrupt somebody, we made the decision that we can no longer manage that risk in the community. Not taken lightly. And I know there's been a lot of, just this past week, we got a call from an advocate that was concerned about an interrupt we had done. And what the advocate presented to us was we interrupted the furlough simply because the person was using again. And when I had the staff look at it, literally this person was not in compliance from the day they left the facility. And we had tried to work with them to include leaving the state, not living where they're supposed to live. And yes, the final decision was they were using again. These are very complicated situations, and I have no problem someone reviewing our decisions, but I'm really troubled that we would get into a situation where we're going to open up the review of our decision, taking away our deference to our expertise on managing risk in the community by opening up to a full-fledged hearing with new evidence and testimony. And that's where our concern lies. It's not the someone looking over our work, which we know between what happens at the legislature and statutorily, our work is looked at quite extensively. It's the issue around dragging out the interrupt, not being effective in managing that population. So that in a
Can I-
nutshell is where our concern comes from.
Can I ask a question, Jim, or Commissioner Baker? The House the House Judiciary Committee added this requirement to the bill, went from, as I understand it, Rule 74 to Rule 75,
Right.
where they did not. Matt's shaking his head. Just the opposite.
Yeah, I
Rule
guess
75.
74 and 75, right.
Anyway, but the House Corrections and Institutions Committee delayed the implementation till July 1 of 2022. 2021, excuse me, to give time to look at this and revisit it. What happens in the interim
As far as
between
the-
now and the effective date of that proposal?
I guess, I mean, if I understand this right, and Matt can correct me because I'm not a lawyer, but I still think the option is there for a judicial review of the record. And we don't necessarily have an issue with that.
There is
have
no
an issue.
judicial review.
So there would be for the next year, if we went with the House version, there'd be no judicial review.
Correct. It's just like it is right now.
Okay, and if
And
we
I was
went
under-
with
I was
our
under-
version, there would be judicial review at what point, 90 days?
Yours is 30.
30. So our version provides immediate judicial review and after a 30-day intercept, correct? So,
Yours is actually broader than the House version.
yeah. You want to explain that, Matt?
Yeah, sure. You you did a technically odd thing by having as the legislature directing that the review be done under Rule 75. Typically, Rule 75 is available for review where there is no direction from the legislature. Usually, if there's direction from the legislature, it comes under Rule 74. But what you did is a review under Rule 75 to determine whether or not the department had wrongfully interrupted the furlough. The House side actually limits what can be heard because it first says that it's a review on the record. Secondly, that the inmate does have the opportunity to make a statement, and then only then the court would make a determination whether or not it needed more evidence. The Senate version leaves that open and allows the appellant to put whatever evidence they want in under Rule 75, which is a catch-all rule. Again, typically it's available when the legislature doesn't direct any kind of specific review. The other limitation in the House version is that it limits it to specific elements of the department's risk review that come from the department's own directives. The Senate side doesn't limit that. So in fact, the part that came out of the Senate is a broader review than out of the House. I did want to make one comment about Jim Baker's this concept that there would be a stay and the interrupt. Unless the stay is provided for by law, you don't get a stay. So that thing being thrown out there is not a legitimate concern. Now, one of the things I've said right along, and I will continue to say this, is that if there was a change in this, where we wouldn't be arguing over interrupts that were 60 days or 90 days. You know, if the if there was more at stake, like 30-day interrupt. If it was a 90-day interrupt, that wouldn't bother me at all. The key is that whatever review occurs, it has to be meaningful. And if we leave it as is, there is no review at all.
Okay. So for a year, there'll be no review.
As it's been for the last 10 or 12 years.
Right. So the House just passed the law, but made it effective in 21. And that was the compromise, I guess. I would tend to think that it would be better to, do you know off the top of your head, Jim, how many furlough intercepts there are of 90 days or longer?
I do not. I do not.
I can tell you that at the end of 2019, the vast majority were under 90 days. I think close to 80%.
So okay. The majority in between. We heard testimony, I think, David, I don't know if you have those figures, that actually there were more like weekend or, short term.
Yes, the furloughs resulted in the overall shortest time between parole, probation, and furlough violations as a result of the number of what are sometimes called quick dips, few day dips in, and overwhelmingly, and so they were slightly under, not too much, but slightly under in terms of the overall length. However, the percentage of the times that people were violated were higher than in others, and so while you had a shorter overall day time frame, what you had were higher numbers of revocations, if you will.
Bren, what would be the practical impact of using Rule 74 for 90 days or longer?
Sounds like from what David just testified to, that it wouldn't apply to as many people. Is that what you're asking about the practical impact? It sounds like there would be fewer people for whom the appeal process would be fewer people would be eligible to appeal to the court for their furlough interrupt if it only applied to 90 days or longer.
Well, most of my complaints from constituents has been of much longer than even 90 days. Yeah, it was unfair that I was interrupted for 120 days or even 6 months or whatever. They just told me I'm going to be interrupted for a year. Jim or Matt?
One of the things I'm trying to get clear, I hear what Matt's saying, but based on my advice from legal counsel, there is the ability under Rule 75 now to look at our process and to determine if, on the record, to determine if we abused our authority in that process of reviewing the interrupt, because a person has the ability internally now to challenge the interrupt. And that, I mean, my legal counsel is telling me that there is a review available under Rule 75 of our process and the decision.
Well, I'm trying to find a compromise here between the House version, your concern, Matt's concern.
Right.
Seems to me that that maybe anything 90 days, we can continue the way things have been for the last 10 years.
And again, I mean, 90 for us would be better than 30s. Senator, because I think,
asking the working group to look at the issue of those between 0 and 90 days, and then passing 90-day stipulation for a Rule 74 review. That's one way to get around and compromise, and hopefully the House would accept that.
But let me add as well that when these cases come through, before they are filed, we go through a merit review. So if an individual, and that's granted to us under statute and under rule, if somebody is seeking release. So, you know, if we have a sex offender who has been, you know, babysitting or something contrary to their rules, we're not going to be pursuing a interrupt review on somebody that shows a blatant disregard for the risk factors of their prior offense and the risk to reoffend. That's one that's going to get a no merit letter back, and we aren't going to be pursuing that. You know, I think that I'm not going to get. I could literally send you the entire memo on how there's no review whatsoever at this point, and that the department is given discretion, has been given complete discretion as to what to do with individuals on furlough, and that occurred during the whole truth in sentencing time during the Douglas administration. I really have no idea who's advising the commissioner regarding anything otherwise, and how they would be doing that, given this current state of the case law. But you know, we don't want to have a flood of cases to deal with de minimis situations either. We want to make sure that we're dealing with serious situations where there is where we can actually impact somebody who's been aggrieved. You know, we're not just looking to, you know, nickel and dime the department. You know, to me, 90 days, and I've even said 120 days for that matter, it has to be something significant for us to argue about. You know, I think that it's a way of shortening the number of people who might be subject to this. When we looked at 30 days, our estimate is that probably 10% would have some kind of legal claim that would be worth pursuing, and at that rate, we were talking about, you know, a dozen cases. You know, I can't imagine that we're going to be doing more than a handful for individuals who are over 90 days.
Okay.
but that would be you representing them, that not pro se, or if they had other counsel.
That's true. I don't know how many people are doing this kind of work privately. I don't think it's many.
But that doesn't discount pro se, right?
Okay, that's true. But again, it'd have to be more than 90 days.
Committee, what do you think? I will propose that we do the 90 days, but make it effective January 1, which is the same date that the good time and other efforts here are effective.
I'm okay. I must admit that this is so technical that, I mean, I'm willing to do what you think is the best thing to do here, because sometimes I get myself too confused by it. Sorry about that, but
I'm fine with what you proposed.
So am I.
Senator, I think just from my standpoint as the commissioner, I think this is a worthy conversation of the working group when the working group gets back together again. Because I think there's throughout this process, going back to what Senator White said, there's a lot of confusion around this. And and I'm not saying we would ever do this, but again, the furlough system was put in place. It's unlike any other system anywhere else. And we try to manage risk the best we can. And I think it's worth a good conversation in the working group about what these stories really are.
Well, I think January 1st gives you some time, but I also think that January 1st, my understanding of the system is that you're pretty much, if somebody's getting an intercept of more than 90 days, they have
It's a
I would assume
graduated,
that
it's a
you have a
graduated
lot of
process, right?
merits behind that decision,
It's a graduated
Yeah.
process.
and that they may have committed a new crime, actually. So,
So from my position, we can live with 90 days. Sorry,
Yeah.
Matt.
I would just point out that the bill, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
We're still talking about interrupts of 90 days or more for technical violations.
Right.
We're talking about new crimes. That's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, the bill defines
Oh.
the technical violation as behavior that would not constitute a new crime.
So then I'm okay with the 90 days, but want to make sure, is it going to the working group?
Yeah.
Okay,
If there is a working group.
if there is a working group, that they would take a look at it.
If not, I would expect to be justice oversight would be the backup. Bryn, is that a way to write that in?
Yeah, I think that if you're going to create some kind of contingency for that working group, that you could draft it so that justice oversight would do the work if the working
In
group.
consultation with all the members that have been assigned to Justice Reinvestment Working Group.
Okay.
Okay.
David?
Just a few cautionary comments, not about the specifics of 90 days or not 90 days and what you're deciding, but within the larger picture. Remember certain pieces of information that we saw before. The population issue that you're having is not because of longer than 90-day intercepts. Those are important things. But resolving that problem will not resolve the population issue, because the overwhelming number of intercepts are less than 90 days, and a significant number of them happen multiple times. And so that has to be looked at. It is true that Vermont is the only state that has furlough, but furlough is special parole by another name. And so in some ways it is different than any other place. In other ways it is not. And it doesn't change the fact that the revocation rates are the highest in the country. And so there is an issue there. No matter how you cut it, there is an issue there. Even when we look at the issue of there being more than one technical violation, your average is 1.6 in terms of the different issues that you've listed out for technical violations. And so if you are wanting to look to lower the population within the prison, then you are going to have a very large focus on those people that are getting the short-term responses of 30 days, 60 days, 2 weeks, whatever. And you are going to need to have something available in the community, because to be clear, this is not an issue of good or bad officers or whatever. It's a system that's been structured in a way that is not designed to get the outcome that you want, frankly. And so the cautionary note is, while certainly the 90-day issue and people being there for a long time and all those challenges are very, very important, and in no way would I suggest otherwise. I will argue that a greater piece of the work is going to be lowering the technical violations and really examining those and figuring out what needs to be put in place to lower those short-term violations, particularly since we now have a lot of research that says those short-term 5-7 day kinds of violations have no greater impact than responding to people in the community. And so I just want to mention that, so that as the working group gets together, and hopefully I will work with the working group as we move forward, that we really do keep that focus as well and not get lost with just the over 90-day to 1 year, because while those are important, statistically, there are less of them than the shorter violation folks.
As a,
Senator, I'd also like to say that, I don't disagree with anything Dave is saying. But from correction standpoint, I understand one of the issues we're trying to deal with is keeping the population down because of cost, right? In particular, our ability to be able to manage the population and who ends up going out of state, driving up our costs significantly. But at the end of the day, for me as the Commissioner of Corrections, it's about better outcomes for the people we're supervising. It's not about the population. I get the population, I agree, I understand, but none of that means anything if we don't have supports in place in communities that have better outcomes. Because I think once we dig into those so-called technical violations, we're going to find out that we got complicated underlying issues. People have heard me say this many times in front of the legislature. We have these conversations about things like 30 days, 90 days, 120 days. At the end of the day, corrections' job is to move people to a place that they're in a better place than they were when we first started touching it. And without the systems in the community to be able to support this complicated population, we will be having this conversation over and over and over again. So I think what I heard David say in his comments is that pulling us apart and figuring out what services are out there become a very important piece of the conversation in order for us not to lead the nation in re-entries from the furlough program. Because many of these situations end up being because we can't get people to a place in the community where they're able to live by the conditions because of mental health issues, addiction issues, and other underlying issues. So, I mean, I think that's what I'm hearing David say.
I absolutely agree with you, Commissioner, and certainly our recommendations in past testimony have clearly been related to the need for those appropriate services and responses so that we don't fall back on what are basically control responses, which are important for community safety when you don't have things in place, but which don't change the long-term outcomes. So absolutely.
Well, there's one, the key issue here that we're all dancing around is in the COVID-19 pandemic loss of 200 million in general fund, how do we fund these community-based programs? And at the same time, cut your budget by 8% and force you to eat a pay act of 4.15%. That is a juggling act that scares me to death, which is why it's important that we build a fence around whatever savings come from out-of-state placement reductions. Because if we don't put that money in the community, we're bound to spend it somewhere else. And I don't know how you're going to manage that particular, you're one of the highest, the Department of Corrections is one of the highest reliant on personnel, which are, and you need the personnel to run the prisons, and you need the personnel to run the community corrections programs and probation and parole and field offices. I don't know how you're going to do this.
Plus we're 96% general funds.
Right. So, I mean, our whole thing is, if we're not careful here, is a setup for disaster as we try to enter into justice reinvestment too and actually make it work, which is actually, I think what we're all saying is that the more important thing is to have the community-based programs, to have the alternatives there in the community so that we don't need to do all these intercepts.
Yeah, and not that I'm a corrections, my background's not corrections, as everybody knows, but it hasn't taken me long to figure out that the best place to manage programming and be the most effective is going to be in the community. But
Yeah.
you've got to have those resources in the community. And when I paid attention to some of the interrupts that we've done since this conversation's come up, you know, it's a combination of, you know, our goal is not to let people get to the point where they're committing another crime. I mean, it's not an easy balancing act when you're dealing with this complicated population. And then you turn around, there's not the, for example, the mental health support for someone that's struggling in their behavior,
Yep.
the result of their, you know, of what may not even be a diagnosed mental health condition.
So Bryn, can you draft that?
Sounds like, are we moving to 90 days?
Yeah.
And would you like to go with the House version of that appeal language, or are you?
Yeah. Yeah, the House version, but it's 90 days, not 30. Everything else stays like it is today. And then that's effective on January 1, 2021, what is next year, 2021? Yeah.
Yeah, by the time you figure out we're wrapping up FY20, we're talking about first 3 months of 21, the
Right.
next 9 months of 21, then in October we'll be working on FY22, right?
Right,
So
so
it's
it's
easy to
effective
close
January 1st. So and we also hope, by the way, that we move away from furlough and use parole more often.
Right.
But that obviously has its struggles. So if I keep my list of 6 issues committee, they're studying probation, studying compassionate parole. We're okay. Are we okay with the changes that the parole board proposed that are in the House version that we covered last week?
Are we? Yeah.
Well, they were, Bryn, they were not major, were they?
Right, so those were the changes that were requested by the chair of the parole board to make parole reviews more consistent among offenders. And I think that the committee was pretty largely in agreement with those when you heard testimony about them.
Yes.
And then the justice reimbursement, the good time being effective January 1st instead of October 1st. Are we okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
Well, if anybody isn't, speak up. So, and then the final one was the working group, and I think we decided that we would make that contingent upon the availability of federal funds to keep the Justice Center involved, and if not, then the Justice Oversight Committee would do the work in consultation with the group that had been members of the new Justice 2 working group.
okay.
So while we're in that section, can I throw out another question for the committee?
Sure.
Right now, we have the that Justice Reinvestment Working Group studying the issue of the appeal process for furlough interrupts. Do you want that study to remain there and have an earlier report date, or do you want to take that out based on the decision?
I don't think we need it.
Okay.
I think I don't know why I'm echoing, but committee, speak up if you have a disagreement. The House, you know. Were there any other issues that we had outstanding?
Just the other thing I was going to mention is that we are going to add that compassionate release study to the work of the
Right.
working group. And leave in those sections that the House added to the working group's tasks to study the probation issue. So that will stay.
Yep. Well, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Technically, the bill hasn't come over yet, right?
Mhm.
So when it does, we would concur with the following proposals of amendment.
Okay.
And Bryn, you could, when you've had time to digest them, and you could send them out and send copies to Matt, Jim, and others, and make sure that everybody's okay with the proposals.
Sure, and I'm planning on writing this as an instances of amendment. Is that okay with
Yep.
you?
Yes. Yep.
I'll be the reporter, so.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
I mean, this is a huge bill. Any other year it would be it, but zooming right along. I don't know of anything else we have for this morning, Peggy. Unless somebody else has any comments on this bill, I don't want to keep people longer than they need to be.
Mhm.
I may miss part of the all Senate caucus, Alice.
Okay.
The only other changes I've on the budget bill, we added the Woodside language from S-232. And that is because the language in S-232 that raises the age and stuff may not make it by July 1st. And I'm really concerned that the Woodside language be somewhere in a bill that passes by July 1. So that is an add. I talked to Representative Pugh this morning, and she was somewhat confused by what we were doing, and I believe she's been in touch with Bryn about a changed amendment that would provide for the two, if Woodside, if there's a plan, it would be approved by the Child Protection Committee and the Justice Oversight Committee.
That's an amendment she'll do?
Well, I guess she wants us to put it in.
Senator, you have that amendment in your email.
I haven't been able to check my email because I only have one device operating besides my phone.
We do have it. Is that what you said, Bryn, in our email?
No, I
I'll
sent it
check.
to yours because it's his amendment. But I just
Oh,
wanted you to
yeah.
there.
Very good.
I think
I'll bring
has-
it up in approach today then.
Okay.
Does
I think it-
everybody
Well,
understand?
is Approps meeting today?
I don't know. I thought we were.
I don't think we've heard anything about it, have we?
No, I don't know.
Let me just go look someplace here.
I can try and check the schedule. Hold on.
Oh, yes. Well, I have a question mark by it, so I don't think I've received I have to go look on my other computer to see if there's an email there about it, but I hadn't seen anything.
Okay, I do have the amendment now.
I don't see it on the schedule, Senate approves.
Oh, yes. You don't see it on the schedule?
I
Okay.
don't see it on Mike's schedule, but that does not mean they're not meeting. Do you want me to email Chrissy Gahuli?
Could you please, Peggy? Thank you.
Yeah.
Jointly report to the Joint Legislative Child Protection Oversight Committee. That should read the Justice Oversight Committee and,
Yeah, it's just the way that the amendment is.
oh, okay.
It would wind up reading, they have to jointly report to Child Protection and Justice Oversight.
Okay, that's the amendment. We drop off the Joint Fiscal Committee because Representative Pugh,
Okay.
I don't know why.
I think the concern is that the only House member in her committee that was on Justice Oversight is not running for reelection.
Oh,
So that
Oh,
okay.
Huh.
And she's the chair of the Child Protection Committee.
Okay.
So that will be one amendment that we'll be offering on the, I guess. Would you send a copy of that to the members of this committee, Bryn, and to Senator Kitchell and the other members of Senate Appropriations.
Sure thing.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
I just texted Chrissy, but I have not heard back yet.
Well, that would be all the better if we're not meeting. Then I'll have more time to buy a new computer.
God.
Yikes.
Senator White, can I book that to office expenses?
Maybe campaign expenses, maybe?
I don't know. Jeez. Why do they always die at times when it's inconvenient?
You know, mine was dying, and I also was having all that trouble with the internet and all that kind of stuff, and that got solved. But Mike Farron and Kevin Moore figured out a way. I have a State House, a lounge computer. They loaned it to me for the period of time.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yeah, so I have sometimes it's a pain in the butt because it's the same as you go into the lounge, so that you don't stay in it all the time. You have to go in it every single time. But it is a good functioning computer, and maybe you could get them to, I just have it on loan until we're done with this silliness.
That's great.
Senator
Yeah.
Probst-
Senator what?
Senator Probst is meeting 1 to 3 today.
Oh, geez. Okay, somebody send us some numbers. 1 to 3 today. Oh,
Well, is there anything else for this committee?
Jesus.
If
I
not,
just asked Alice whether she's heard anything on when we're going to do the judicial confirmations.
I haven't.
judicial retention, you mean?
Judicial retention. So there has been some discussion. I talked with John Bloomer about a possible route that he's working on, which sounded like a pretty good system if everybody can get on board with doing that in terms of Mitzi and Tim and how it could work. It's different than what we've been doing, but it certainly sounds like, in my mind, it could work. And I think it's very important that we definitely get it done.
Yeah. Well,
So-
the problem I would think is how you do a secret ballot.
He has a way worked out that it would be a secret ballot. It would involve actually physical mailing, I think. But it sounds like it could work from how he described it. So yes, the plan would be to do that before we adjourn. I'm not sure what the time frame is at all. Hard to believe it could happen before the end of June, but
Would be interesting.
working on it. And it sounds like from everything he said, it would be a way of doing it and getting it done. I'm very worried if you don't get it, if we don't get it done at all.
Well, how you do, like for a secret ballot to elect the speaker?
How do we elect the speaker by secret ballot?
Yeah, in the House and in the Senate, we usually, don't we do that by secret ballot for the pro tem? No,
Mm, we don't
the
do
House
did
is
the
a
last
secret
time.
ballot.
it. We
Huh?
did the last
We
time?
did the last time.
Yeah.
So mail-in ballot. Any
mail-in ballot.
restrictions
we
on
did
who can bring
secret-
that back?
We did secret ballots for the pro tem. I don't remember that. We
Well,
did
secret
ballots
ballot.
in the caucus to put
Yes.
forward our nominee, but when we
Yeah,
got to the
we're-
floor of the Senate, we didn't.
Yes. No, you're right. I was referring to the caucus where everybody had Australian ballot and
Right,
then you put it in.
right. But that was because we had more than one person vying for it.
So Jeanette, you'd still be the head teller if we did retention this way.
Well, how?
Probably-
1,
We
2,
mail-
3.
We mail the ballots down to Jeanette. Is that the idea?
Okay.
We've gone beyond Senate Judiciary purview. When we were discussing secret ballots for the for the retention of judges, that was somewhat judiciary purview, but I think we've gone beyond. So I think I'm going to thank our witnesses. I'm going to thank the committee for all its hard work and say goodbye and thank Bryn for all her hard work on justice reinvestment, and special thanks to folks at the Justice Center for everything they've done for Vermont.
Yeah, yeah.
And David, and our sincere condolences to Ellen on the loss of her.
Thank you very much, and it's been our pleasure. We look forward to continuing to work with you all.
Thank you, David. See you again soon.